Jimmy Fallon breaks down live as secrets unravel between BTS's JIMIN and Jungkook post-military. What happened when they finally met again? Don't let him in, lock the studio down. The camera had already gone live. The studio lights scorched white overhead. The audience fell into stunned silence as Jimmy Fallon stood frozen mid-monologue, his cue cards trembling in his hands. The glint in his eyes wasn't from the lights, it was from tears. Behind him, the screen that had been playing cheerful BTS clips from their early years abruptly cut to static. A new, unauthorized video started rolling, hijacked. There was no mistaking the two figures on screen, JIMIN and Jungkook, meeting for the first time after 2 long, silent years apart. And it wasn't the joyful reunion fans had fantasized about. Jungkook's jaw was clenched tight, eyes rimmed with unshed fury. JIMIN stood still, back stiff, gaze empty like he'd trained himself to forget. "You left without saying a word," Jungkook's voice cracked, low and trembling. "You promised you'd wait." "I waited," JIMIN said coldly. "But not for you." A collective gasp rose from the live audience. Jimmy's face crumpled. "Cut the feed," he shouted, but it was too late. Millions were already watching. The damage had been done. Earlier that day, Jimmy had prepared for what should have been the comeback event of the decade. After their mandatory military service, BTS was finally reuniting in public, starting with Jungkook and JIMIN, the golden magne and the ethereal dancer. Fallon had flown to Seoul, rehearsed the whole segment for weeks. But nothing could have prepared him or the world for the truth that unraveled. The footage on screen shifted, dimly lit security camera angles, raw and grainy, capturing a clandestine hallway inside the military base from months ago. Jungkook waiting outside a metal door, a red envelope in his hand. The look of hope in his eyes, that unmistakable glimmer, before the door opened and JIMIN walked past him without a glance, eyes ahead like Jungkook was a ghost. The red envelope fluttered to the ground. Back in the studio, Jimmy finally managed to kill the feed. The screen went black. The silence was suffocating. Jimmy tried to speak, but his voice broke. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper, an exclusive, pre-approved message JIMIN was supposed to read on air. It was signed just days ago, but now it felt like a lie. And Jimmy Fallon, a seasoned host who'd interviewed presidents and pop stars, who'd danced through monologues and smiled through global scandals, stood on his own stage, shaking and broken, as a truth too personal and too human to script unspooled live before the world. The show cut to an emergency break. Meanwhile, in a silent hotel suite 30 floors above, Jungkook stared at his own reflection. His phone was buzzing nonstop, fans, labels, news outlets. But all he could hear was Jimin's voice echoing in his mind. "You think time stops just because you do?" The hotel mirror reflected more than just his face. It reflected 2 years of unanswered questions, of nights in the barracks staring at a letter he never sent, of betrayal he never imagined would come from the one person who knew him best. Jungkook pressed his forehead to the cold glass. His hands trembled, not from anger, but from the weight of everything unsaid. Across town, JIMIN sat in a private rehearsal room, the only light coming from the amber glow of a single floor lamp. He was silent, motionless, watching the news unfold on a muted television screen. His phone lay face down. He didn't move when the door opened. "You knew this would happen," said a voice from the shadows. JIMIN closed his eyes, but didn't answer. Because yes, he had known. He had wanted it to happen. And yet, his heart ached all the same. You think you know someone until the silence says otherwise. The words weren't spoken, but they hung heavy in the air of Jimmy Fallon's dressing room. It had been 8 hours since the broadcast went off air, and the studio had been locked down by NBC's crisis team. PR representatives had scrambled to release a vague statement citing technical interference, but the truth was out, and it had already spread like wildfire. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Jimin cold-hearted. Hashtag Jungkook broken inside. Hashtag Fallon meltdown. Jimmy sat slumped on the couch, head buried in his hands, still in the same suit. His phone lay face up on the table, playing the looped clip of the unauthorized footage that had hijacked the studio's systems. He played it again. And again. The hallway. The envelope. The walk away. The silence. I had dinner with them 3 years ago, he muttered to his assistant, who stood by helplessly. They held hands when they thought the cameras weren't watching. They were in love. Or something close to it. They were family, she replied. No, Jimmy looked up, eyes bloodshot. It was more than that. The sun had yet to rise over Seoul when Jungkook finally stepped out of the hotel. He wore a hooded sweatshirt, mask up, but there was no hiding him, not from the fans that waited outside, nor from the cameras that now followed his every move like wolves circling a wounded deer. Flashes exploded in rapid fire. Jungkook. Is it true? Did Jimin betray you? Why was the letter never delivered? Are you two done for good? He didn't speak. He didn't even look at them. The only sound he responded to was the nearly inaudible buzz of his phone. A text had come through from a private number. Come to practice room 3B. Alone. JM. He read it twice, jaw tightening. He didn't know what he wanted from Jimin anymore. Answers? Closure? Revenge? Or maybe just a moment to finally say everything he couldn't in that hallway. Jimin stood barefoot on the wooden floor of the rehearsal room. The space was dark except for the rectangle of early dawn light spilling through the blinds. He hadn't danced. He hadn't moved. When the door clicked open, he didn't turn. The silence stretched. So, Jungkook's voice was hollow, almost curious. Now you want to talk? Jimin turned around slowly, face expressionless. I didn't ask you here to talk. Jungkook stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Then what? Another cold shoulder? Another walk away. Jimin's lips barely twitched. You want the truth? I wanted the truth 2 years ago. Well, Jimin exhaled, stepping closer. Here it is. I read the letter. Jungkook flinched. What? I read it. The red envelope. The one you dropped. His fists clenched. You walked past me like I didn't exist. I had to, Jimin whispered. You had to. Jungkook barked, stepping forward. You read it, my soul was in that letter, and you left me standing there like a damn fool? I read it, Jimin repeated, voice trembling now. And I burned it. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. Jungkook's breath hitched, eyes widening as if he'd been physically struck. You what? His voice cracked. Why? Jimin's jaw tightened. Because if I hadn't, I would have stayed. You think that's noble? Jungkook's voice rose, wounded and furious. You think burning the last thing I ever gave you is some kind of mercy? You don't understand what was happening behind the scenes. Then make me understand. Jimin stepped back. Do you remember Hyungwon? Jungkook blinked. Your cousin? The one who disappeared during service. Yes. Jimin's voice broke, the pain finally surfacing. He didn't die in combat. He was silenced. They said he leaked classified data. But the real reason? He refused to follow an illegal order. He tried to protect civilians. And they buried him for it. Jungkook's chest rose and fell, the fury dimming, replaced by something heavier. I was told that if I didn't fall in line, if I didn't distance myself from anything controversial, including you, they'd start digging into my family. So you sacrificed me. I tried to protect you. You erased me. The words landed like a blow. Jimin looked away. I thought if I cut you off clean, they'd stop watching. And what now? Jungkook asked, voice low and bitter. Why call me here? Because they're watching again. Jungkook stared, confusion knitting across his face. Who? Jimin walked to the wall and peeled back a corner of the mirror. A tiny, blinking dot of red glared back at them. They never stopped. Meanwhile, back at NBC headquarters in New York, an encrypted file had been delivered anonymously to Fallon's team. The subject line read, Project Lotus, eyes only. J. Jimmy sat before his laptop, heart pounding. He clicked. Dozens of surveillance videos, military rooms, government corridors, training grounds, each one showing BTS members under scrutiny. Not just Jungkook. Not just Jimin. All of them. Private conversations, emotional breakdowns, internal conflicts. All archived. Labeled. Monitored. They were never just serving, Jimmy whispered. They were being studied. He dialed the emergency contact for Yoongi, praying the number hadn't changed. Inside a government facility in an undisclosed location, a council of high-ranking military advisors gathered. "We've lost containment," said the man in the center, his insignia unreadable. The footage leaked on Fallon's show was supposed to be scrubbed. Another officer tapped on his tablet. "Jimin's making moves. And Jungkook knows more than we thought." The room fell silent. Finally, the commanding officer said, "Initiate protocol silence. Start with Jimin." Back at the rehearsal room, Jimin's phone buzzed once. He looked down. His face paled. "What is it?" Jungkook asked. Jimin looked up, eyes wide. "We have to leave. Now." "Why?" "Because I was wrong," Jimin whispered. "They're not done with us. They're clearing the board." Before Jungkook could ask what that meant, the rehearsal room lights cut out. The electronic lock on the door clicked shut from the outside. And then, darkness. Silence. But in that silence, a new kind of fire sparked, not from betrayal, but from the kind of fear only those who know they've been hunted can understand. Jungkook reached out, grasped Jimin's wrist. "You should have told me everything." Jimin nodded, breath shaky. "I know. But it's not too late." Somewhere in the building, the sound of boots echoed, methodical, heavy, deliberate. "I'm not letting them take you," Jungkook said. Jimin's eyes met his, and for the first time in 2 years, there was no coldness between them. No distance. No silence. Just survival. And the truth that even a broken bond can become a weapon when it matters most. "You said we'd be safe," Jungkook hissed, his breath ragged as he pressed his back against the mirrored wall of the rehearsal room. The mirror was still cracked from when Jimin had torn it open to reveal the surveillance bug. Dust and sweat mingled in the air, thick and electric with panic. Jimin was crouched near the exit panel, prying at the locking mechanism with a piece of broken metal rod he had found lodged in a cracked speaker cabinet. His fingers bled, but he didn't stop. "I thought we were," he said, voice low and raw. "I thought they'd lost interest. After everything went quiet for 6 months, I thought, maybe it was over. Maybe it was just the war." Jungkook turned sharply. "Just the war? That wasn't a war, Jimin. That was a test site. We didn't serve our country, we served as test subjects." The door suddenly hissed. A noise like gas releasing came from the overhead vents. Jungkook sniffed the air. "They're not coming in." "No," Jimin said, scrambling upright. "They're gassing us." Jungkook didn't hesitate. He bolted to the corner of the room where a collapsible storage unit stood. With a grunt, he pulled it aside, revealing a maintenance shaft hatch behind it. "You really did prepare for this," Jimin said, eyes wide. Jungkook snapped the hatch open and motioned. "You told me once, every building has a vein. You just have to find where the blood runs. You weren't just talking about architecture, were you?" Jimin gave a crooked smile. "I was talking about escape." They crawled into the shaft just as the hiss from the vents grew louder. The hatch sealed behind them, and within seconds, the rehearsal room was flooded with pale white mist. For a long moment, the only sound was their breath and the dull clang of knees and elbows against steel. Jungkook led the way, flashlight clenched between his teeth. "Where does this go?" "Out." "Maybe," Jimin muttered. "This building connects to the old SM training center. There's an exit through the underground tunnel if it hasn't been sealed." "Maybe is good enough for me." Jimin paused. "You really mean that?" Jungkook looked back, eyes fierce in the dim light. "You left me. Lied to me. Burned the last thing I gave you. But you're still the only person I trust in a crawlspace full of death fog." Jimin's laugh was bitter and aching. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." They moved in silence for another 10 meters before Jimin spoke again. "Do you remember the 3rd week at boot camp? When they pulled us into that psych eval, that wasn't really an eval." Jungkook nodded grimly. "I remember the needles. The humming noise. The white room. I asked the doctor where the cameras were," Jimin said softly. He smiled and said, "Everywhere is a lens if you control the light." They were measuring our reactions. Heart rate. Loyalty. No, Jimin corrected. They were measuring something else. Neural resistance. Pattern deviation. Response to emotional trauma. We weren't just soldiers. We were being studied like rats in a controlled collapse. Jungkook crawled faster. And all this time, the reunion, the Fallon show. They never wanted us to come back together, JIMIN said. That's what triggered the failsafe. Us being seen again. Together. In public. Suddenly, a bright vertical slit of light appeared ahead, the end of the shaft. They kicked it open and tumbled out into a boiler room beneath the old SM building. Dust filled their lungs. The air was hot, metallic. Somewhere above them, footsteps could be heard, distant, but moving fast. Up the maintenance stairs, JIMIN said, motioning to the rusted spiral. Third floor leads to a delivery dock. As they climbed, the memories began to flood back, memories they'd spent 2 years trying to bury. Remember the night I asked you if you ever wondered why Namjoon never came back from his last deployment? JIMIN said quietly mid-step. Jungkook nodded. He said he was working on diplomatic logistics. That was the lie. The truth is he was captured. Not by enemies. By our own side. For trying to leak a report about the psychological manipulation being done on recruits. Jungkook stopped climbing. What? They tortured him, JIMIN whispered. He's not dead. But he's not Namjoon anymore. The last time I saw him, he didn't remember my name. They reached the dock. It was empty, silent except for the soft whir of distant machinery. JIMIN pulled a tarp off a motorbike stashed in the shadows. Jungkook raised a brow. Since when do you ride? Since I realized running on foot wouldn't be fast enough. They tore through the alleyways of Seoul before dawn, the city eerily empty, the streets whispering of a storm approaching. By the time they reached the Han River Bridge, dawn had broken in bloody streaks across the sky. Jungkook clutched the back of JIMIN's jacket. His mind raced. What do we do now? JIMIN pulled over beneath a closed-off maintenance tunnel and turned to face him. I need to show you something. He reached into the lining of his jacket and pulled out a drive. I got this from Taehyung. He smuggled it out 6 months ago. Said it was our real contract. Jungkook took the drive. Plugged it into his phone. His face changed as the documents loaded. Operation, idle code. Subject group, BTS. Objective, controlled emotional disintegration. Goal, global parapolitical compliance test via manufactured celebrity system. He read in silence. Then again. Then again. His hands shook. It wasn't just about us, Jungkook said finally. They were using us to test the world. JIMIN nodded. To see how much people will believe. How deep they'll love something fake. And what happens when you break it in front of them? Jungkook's voice turned to a whisper. They never intended for us to come back. We were meant to disappear. But we didn't, JIMIN said. We're still here. A sudden roar broke through the silence. Helicopters. Sirens. The skyline to the east lit with sharp blue flashes. They've found us. Jungkook gripped the drive, tucked it into his waistband. We're not going quietly. JIMIN reached for him. Even after everything, you still want to stand with me? Jungkook looked him dead in the eye. I never stopped standing with you. I just stopped believing you wanted me there. The ground shook as the first blast echoed from the far end of the tunnel. JIMIN smiled. For real this time. Then let's give them the encore they were never ready for. And together, they vanished into the storm. You don't know what you've done. The voice crackled through the emergency broadcast radio, barely audible over the whir of chopper blades and sirens screaming through the Seoul skyline. JIMIN's hand tightened on the handlebar of the bike as they wove through back streets under the metallic orange dawn. Jungkook, behind him, held on with one hand, his other clutching the drive like it was the last organ keeping him alive. They'd been running for 16 hours. Exhaustion clung to them like smoke, but adrenaline burned hotter. The truth had broken containment. And now there were no rehearsals. No cameras. No fan chants. Only survival. Pull off at the next turn, Jungkook said suddenly, pointing to a narrow alleyway leading toward the old Sinsa district. There's a safe house. You're sure? JIMIN asked without turning. I built it myself. They slid between rusting fences and dumpsters until they reached a chain-linked gate. Behind it was an abandoned building, an old dance academy from their trainee days, now boarded up and forgotten by time. Jungkook kicked the gate open. Jimin wheeled the bike inside. Once the heavy doors shut behind them, silence fell like a curtain. A sickly golden light bled through broken windows. Dust motes floated like ash. The room still smelled faintly of sweat, wood polish, and distant echoes of music. Jungkook dropped his bag and walked straight to the center of the practice room. He stared at the cracked floorboards, the mirror half covered with rotting newspaper. "I came here after you left," he said, barely above a whisper. "I danced until my legs bled. Until I forgot what it felt like to be betrayed." Jimin stood frozen. "I was going to meet you here," Jungkook continued. "The night we enlisted. You said, one last rehearsal, no cameras, no schedule, just us. And then you didn't show." Jimin's voice was thick when he answered. "I was already on a plane. I didn't even pack my own bags. They told me if I saw you again, it would compromise everything. You let them make me believe you stopped caring. I thought you'd move on. I thought I'd kill myself." The words slammed into the room like thunder. Jimin stumbled back a step, face white. "You weren't the only one breaking, Jimin. You think burning a letter was a sacrifice? I carried your silence like a knife inside my chest for 2 years." Jimin swallowed hard. "I didn't know. You didn't want to know." Silence thickened between them like smoke choking out the air. But it wasn't hatred. It was something worse, truth. "Did you ever really love me?" Jungkook asked suddenly, looking up. "Or was that part of the performance too?" Jimin's mouth opened. Closed. Then finally, a broken whisper. "I still do." Jungkook turned away. "Then why did it take a war for you to say it?" Before Jimin could answer, a crash sounded from the far hallway. Both of them froze. "Third floor windows," Jungkook said immediately, already reaching for the emergency lever near the base of the wall. "They've tracked us." "No," Jimin said. "Not them." The door swung open, and standing there, wild-eyed, panting, covered in sweat and bruises, was Taehyung. He stumbled in, collapsing to his knees. "You two need to see this," he said hoarsely, pulling a bloodied envelope from inside his shirt. "They're not just coming for us anymore." Jungkook rushed forward, helping him up. "What happened?" "They hit Hobie's compound last night. He's gone. Jean too. Youngie's off-grid. I barely got out." Jimin took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a strip of photographs, grainy, night vision surveillance stills. BTS members. Lined up. Hands zip-tied behind their backs. Bags over their heads. "They're not arresting us," Taehyung said. "They're erasing us." Jungkook's fists clenched. "They want to control the story. Use our disappearance as a PR tragedy. Maybe say we had a breakdown. Or went into exile. Or died in some noble military accident." Jimin stared at the photographs. "What do we do?" "Fight," Taehyung said. Jungkook nodded slowly. "But not just to survive. We expose everything. The files. The tests. The manipulation. The truth behind the fame." Jimin looked between them. "Then we need a signal. A broadcast." "Jimmy Fallon," Jungkook said. Jimin blinked. "Are you insane? After what happened last time? He's the only one who knows the full extent. He saw the files. If he still wants to help." Taehyung interrupted, pulling out a second device. "Already contacted. He's agreed to a live stream. 1 hour, no edits. Global reach. And the price?" Jimin asked bitterly. Taehyung met his gaze. "Our faces. Our names. Our legacies." A beat of silence. Then Jungkook stepped forward. "We were never idols. We were mirrors. They made the world fall in love with a reflection. Time they saw the real thing." The room fell into preparation. Cameras mounted. Wires linked. The signal masked and bounced between proxies. The coordinates sent to Fallon's encrypted inbox. Jimin changed into a plain black shirt. He stared at himself in the mirror. Older. Thinner. Worn. Human. Jungkook came to stand beside him. "Do you regret it?" Jimin asked. "Loving you." Jungkook shook his head. "No. Believing you'd never come back? Every day. I'll never leave again. We may not survive this. Then we die honest. They stood before the camera. A red light blinked. Live. Jimmy Fallon's face appeared in a split screen from his NYC bunker studio. This is unfiltered, he began, voice grave. You are watching this live. No producers. No handlers. No network oversight. He looked directly into the lens. JIMIN. Jungkook. The world is listening. JIMIN stepped forward. For years, you watched us sing, dance, smile. You believed we were a symbol of hope, love, unity. But what you didn't see was what they did to us behind the curtain. Jungkook followed. We were chosen not just for talent, but for malleability. They took kids who dreamed of music, and they turned us into a psychological operation. We were conditioned, tested, weaponized through our image. Every tear, every hug, every I love you monitored, measured. They even manipulated our emotions toward each other. Broke us. Separated us. Forced silence where there was once love. Taehyung appeared beside them. This wasn't just about us. It was about you. The fans. The world. They wanted to see how far people would follow fiction. How deep devotion can be manipulated. Jungkook held up the drive. These are the files. Every experiment. Every order. Every betrayal. Fallon's voice came through, shaky. And what happens now? JIMIN smiled sadly. Now, we become the villains in their version of the story. Jungkook looked dead into the camera. But if even one of you out there remembers the truth, then we win. The stream cut. Seconds later, the compound exploded. The screen went black. But the internet was already on fire. And somewhere, deep beneath layers of government protocols and algorithms, a quiet panic began. Because the world had just seen the truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The morning after the broadcast was unlike any the world had ever known. The sky above Seoul seemed eerily still, as if even the clouds were holding their breath. There were no official news reports. No scheduled programming. Every major outlet either fell silent or played retractions, apologies, or bizarre errors in transmission messages. But the footage was already out there. Clipped, translated, multiplied. Torrents. Telegram. Private sites. Phone to phone. It raced across continents like a virus of truth. The video of JIMIN, Jungkook, and Taehyung standing in that forgotten room had broken the illusion the world didn't even know it was inside. People rioted. Fans wept. Politicians panicked. Media corporations held emergency meetings while simultaneously scrubbing any association with BTS. Contractual ties dissolved overnight. Labels deleted years of footage. Advertisers pulled campaigns. Streaming platforms began mass takedowns of music that once defined a generation. The boys had not just exposed themselves. They had exposed the system. And now they were ghosts. 3 days after the explosion at the safe house, JIMIN opened his eyes in a dark room with no windows. His throat was dry. His wrists ached. But he was alive. Barely. A soft hum buzzed from an overhead light. He tried to sit, but his body protested. Tubes snaked into his arms. Sensors were taped to his chest. Footsteps echoed. He turned his head, and through the frosted glass door, a shadow approached. A voice, calm and male, crackled through the intercom. You weren't supposed to survive that. JIMIN didn't answer. He focused instead on the ache inside his ribs. Something had cracked. Maybe more than one. You were supposed to die a martyr. A rogue idol with a cause. The world would have mourned you for 6 weeks, maybe 7. Then they would have moved on. The door opened. The man who entered wore a gray suit. No rank. No insignia. Just steel eyes and a face that had never learned to smile. We underestimated you. JIMIN coughed. You always did. The man pulled up a chair. Your broadcast changed things. But not in the way you think. You've triggered a secondary protocol. Protocol. Yes. Operation Black Echo. JIMIN swallowed. What does that mean? The man smiled thinly. It means we will erase not only your bodies, but your narratives. Your story. Your identity. In 6 months, no one will remember you. No one will believe you existed. We will turn the world's memory against itself. You think people will forget? JIMIN rasped. You think Army will forget? They already have, the man said, tapping on a tablet. We've rewritten every trending topic. Injected deepfake scandals. Replaced archived videos. Reissued AI-generated songs under different names. The algorithm is our ally. And you're just a corrupted file waiting to be wiped. Jimin's vision blurred with rage and exhaustion. Where's Jungkook? Dead, the man said flatly. Jimin stared. You're lying. You'll believe it soon enough, the man replied. Everyone does, eventually. Jimin closed his eyes. Not because he believed it, but because the alternative, hope, was even more dangerous in a place like this. Meanwhile, miles beneath the city, under a forgotten subway line long sealed to the public, a figure limped through darkness. Jungkook. Alive. Barely. His left leg dragged. His right arm was bandaged and burned. But in his hand, still clutched tightly like a sacred relic, was the drive. The only remaining copy after the explosion. The signal broadcast had been traced. The location compromised. But he had escaped, pulled from rubble by a group that had no flag, no nation, no logo, only a mission. The Resistance. Formed years ago by insiders who saw what the idol system was becoming. They weren't fans. They were true keepers, disillusioned ex-managers, rogue tech analysts, even ex-label executives. And one of them was leading Jungkook now down an abandoned maintenance tunnel lit only by a single flashlight. You shouldn't be alive, the woman muttered. The blast radius was unforgiving. Jungkook didn't respond. His voice was gone. His throat raw from smoke and shouting. They reached a steel door. She input a code. Inside, a war room. Old monitors. Maps. Wires. Dozens of people. Screens showing glitchy footage from around the world, fans protesting, mysterious disappearances, hacked news feeds. The world was spiraling. You lit the fire, she said. Now we burn down the rest. Jungkook collapsed into a chair. I need Jimin. He's gone. No, his voice was gravel. He's not. She handed him a folder. Then prove them wrong. Inside, a blurry surveillance photo. Jimin. Hooked to machines. Caption. Facility B7, Namsan Underground Neurocomplex. Jungkook looked up, eyes reigniting with something ancient and violent. When do we move? She smiled. At midnight. Elsewhere, in a clean room guarded by silence, Taehyung stood before a tribunal of masked figures. His face was swollen. His wrists chained. You betrayed the system, said one. And yet, you're still here. Taehyung smirked. That should worry you. You had access to the terminal files. The core encryption logs. Where are they? Taehyung lifted his chin. Where they'll hurt you most. One of the masked judges stood. You believe in them that much? I love them. And now? Now I make sure the world never stops remembering. Suddenly, the lights cut out. Alarms. Explosions rocked the complex. Outside, chaos bloomed. Jungkook had come for Jimin. The resistance had hacked the defense grids. Drones swarmed the air. Civilians had begun gathering above, unaware that below them, a second rebellion was erupting. The mission was precise. Infiltrate, retrieve, destroy the memory erasure server. Jungkook moved like a ghost. Gunfire raged behind him. Every step hurt. But he moved forward. Room by room. Floor by floor. Until finally, he reached it. Facility B7. Room 302. He kicked the door open. Jimin lay strapped to a bed unconscious. A monitor blinked red above him. Neural mapping complete. Memory cleanse in 342. No, Jungkook whispered. He rushed forward, ripping wires, disabling the lock. Jimin's eyes fluttered open. At first, they didn't focus. Then, Kook. I got you. Jimin choked a laugh. I knew you would. A voice cut in through the speakers. The same man in gray. Even now, you think you've won? Jungkook didn't look at the camera. He looked only at Jimin. I'm not here to win, he said. I'm here to remind the world who we were. He pulled Jimin into his arms, pressed a small device into the heart of the server. Goodbye, he whispered. The EMP detonated. The building shook. Every memory wiping system fried. Screens went black. But out there, across phones, laptops, walls, projectors, one last file autoplayed. A video of 7 boys in a practice room, laughing, crying, holding each other. Not idols, not products, just people. Real, flawed, beautiful. And suddenly, across the world, millions remembered again. JIMIN and Jungkook escaped into the night, smoke and sirens behind them, but a new dawn ahead. Because the truth, once set free, doesn't die. It sings. Rain was pouring over Seoul like a purge from the heavens. Buildings shimmered through the downpour, silhouettes of steel and glass drowning under gray skies. Every alley felt like a confession waiting to be unearthed. In a parking garage deep beneath the heart of the city, under flickering fluorescent lights, JIMIN sat on a metal crate, shivering, soaked to the bone. Jungkook leaned against a pillar nearby, still clutching his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him hours earlier. Neither had spoken for a long time. They were alive. But the cost was becoming unbearable. JIMIN finally looked up. His voice was a whisper drowned beneath thunder. How many more? Jungkook didn't answer. JIMIN stood, his fists clenched. How many more of us do they have? How many are being erased right now? Faces blurred. Voices filtered. Families paid to stay silent. Fans turned into skeptics. Jungkook stared at the floor. Too many. JIMIN approached, the rain on his jacket dripping onto the concrete floor. Then we can't stop. We're not soldiers, Jungkook muttered. We're broken. Hunted. Half dead. JIMIN knelt in front of him, eyes fierce. We're witnesses. That makes us dangerous. Jungkook met his gaze. There was something in JIMIN's eyes that hadn't been there before, not just fire, but clarity. Resolve. The kind that comes from watching the world you loved try to erase you and failing. You came for me, JIMIN whispered. You destroyed a city to save one person. You weren't just one person, Jungkook said. You were the part of me they couldn't rewrite. Suddenly, a sound, a deliberate triple knock echoed from the edge of the garage. JIMIN was on his feet instantly. Jungkook raised the stolen sidearm he carried in his coat. From the shadows emerged a tall figure, limping slightly. His voice was quiet, familiar. Still arguing like we're backstage in 2019. God, it's good to see you idiots. Taehyung. He looked like hell, bruised, bleeding from the lip, jacket torn, but he was grinning. JIMIN ran to him. They embraced for the first time in years. Real. Wordless. Tight enough to forget, even for a second, the years of silence. Where have you been? Jungkook asked, stepping forward. Buying time, Taehyung said, pulling out a small hard drive wrapped in bloody gauze. And maybe the last piece of the puzzle. They huddled behind a pillar, rain leaking through the concrete ceiling above. What's on it? JIMIN asked. Taehyung's voice turned hard. A list. Every name. Every location. Every project BTS was linked to. Including Program K. Jungkook stiffened. You mean the gene modulation tests? Taehyung nodded. They used us to study how extreme emotional conditioning affected cellular aging, resilience, even genetic inheritance. You're saying they were trying to breed future idols based on us? JIMIN whispered. No, not idols. Weapons. The word hit like lightning. Jungkook grabbed the drive. We need to get this out. Somewhere no algorithm can erase it. I know just the place, Taehyung said. But we'll need Yoongi. JIMIN looked away. Yoongi went underground. We don't know if he's still alive. He is, Taehyung replied. I saw him 2 days ago. Jungkook was stunned. Why didn't you say anything? Because he didn't want to be found. Not until he was ready. And now? JIMIN asked. Taehyung smirked. Now he's pissed. Elsewhere, across the globe, chaos unfolded. In Washington, D.C., an unnamed senator collapsed on live television moments after being questioned about foreign psychological warfare programs. In Tokyo, a major broadcasting company CEO disappeared hours before a whistleblower was scheduled to testify. In Berlin, masked protesters held up glowing screens playing a looped video of JIMIN's final broadcast, shouting in dozens of languages, "They lied to you." And in an unmarked facility beneath Jeju Island, Namjoon sat in a padded room, humming softly. A man entered. A scientist. Face hidden. He adjusted the neural headset. Can you still remember your name? Namjoon didn't stop humming. But then, under his breath, he said something the scientist wasn't meant to hear. A leader never forgets his team. Then he smiled. The system flashed red. The next morning, the facility was ashes. Back in Seoul, the trio JIMIN, Jungkook, Taehyung made their way to an abandoned recording studio where Yoongi was rumored to have disappeared after discharge. When they arrived, the door was unlocked. Inside, dust coated everything. Old mixers. Instruments. A piano untouched. But there were candles burning, faint incense drifting in the corners. Yoongi was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, headphones in. He opened them slowly as they entered. Long enough, he said simply. You knew we were coming? Jungkook asked. Yoongi gave a dry smile. I saw the signal. The EMP. The server crash. Only 3 people in the world could have pulled that off. 2 of them were standing in front of me now. JIMIN stepped forward. Are you still with us? I never left, Yoongi said. I just had to disappear to become useful. They gathered around a whiteboard littered with notes. Photos. Doodles. Handwriting. Maps. Music sheets. We're not trying to survive anymore, Yoongi said. We're taking it back. Taehyung slid the hard drive onto the table. Yoongi plugged it in. Silence fell. One by one, the files opened. Project K. Initiated. March 2018. Objective. Test feasibility of emotional resonance control on global scale using manufactured artist personas with implanted psychological triggers. Jungkook read aloud, disbelief in every syllable. Implanted. Hypnosis. Routine repetition. Controlled feedback loops. Subliminal audio buried in our tracks. Even heartbeat resonance in stage formations, Yoongi added. We didn't just make people feel. We trained them to react. JIMIN sat down, shaking. We weren't just symbols. We were tools. But not anymore, Jungkook said. They looked at each other. For the first time, 5 of them were together again. They began writing a new song. Not for charts. Not for fans. But for history. A coded message. A manifesto. Buried inside melody. Layered across harmonies. Structured to resist algorithmic filtering. It would go out in fragments, through burner accounts, radio static, whispered into microphones during underground rallies. It would reach ears before it was found by systems meant to suppress it. They called it the memory war. And when the first riff played, hidden inside a sample used by an indie artist in Montreal, people stopped in the streets. They felt something. Like a forgotten dream. Like déjà vu echoing from the edge of consciousness. Within a week, fragments were everywhere. Street DJs blended it into house mixes. Hackers embedded it into hold music for government hotlines. One teenager played it on a flute in the middle of Shibuya. Another whispered the chorus into a prison wall in Istanbul. And the world began to wake up. But the system retaliated. Bounties were issued. Faces plastered with wanted in digital overlays. Deepfakes portraying JIMIN committing crimes. AI-generated confessions. Laws passed to block the broadcast of terrorist audio. Still, the song spread. In a final move of desperation, the shadow force behind the idol control system activated Protocol Zero. A total memory reset. A blackout scheduled to wipe entire digital archives, social media databases, music platforms, cloud drives. A 22-minute erasure scheduled to occur during a solar flare, a natural alibi. The team had just one night left. Inside the underground studio, the 5 sat together for what might be the last time. JIMIN looked at each of them. If this is it, if they wipe everything. They won't wipe us, Jungkook said. Because we're not data. We're memory. Taehyung smiled, blood on his knuckles. And memory fights back. Yoongi lit a cigarette. Then let's finish the damn track. And they did. Together. One final chorus screamed into the dark, carrying everything they were, everything they lost, everything they refused to forget. And as the solar flare began to light the sky, as the power grid strained and the world teetered on the edge of amnesia, a single file remained untouched. 001 underscore memory war underscore final dot wave. It's metadata read. We are not a band. We are a rebellion. And the beat dropped. Somewhere, beneath the earth where Wi-Fi signals couldn't reach and satellites only told half-truths, JIMIN stood alone in an abandoned train tunnel, the walls dripping with condensation, the air thick with mildew and tension. The echoes of his footsteps chased him through the dark. Every 20 feet, a speaker embedded into the concrete wall released a soft, rhythmic pulse, a sonic metronome that aligned with the underground rebellion's heartbeat. This was the nerve center, the last stronghold before the flood. They called it the marrow. He reached a steel door, knocked once, paused, then twice in quick succession. The panel slid open, revealing Yoongi holding a glowing tablet, his tired eyes glowing faintly blue in the dim light. "You're late," Yoongi said, stepping aside. "Had to lose a tail," JIMIN replied, wiping sweat and blood from his jaw. "You bring it?" Yoongi asked. JIMIN unzipped his soaked jacket and produced a weathered cassette tape, one of the last analog recordings in the world. Yoongi blinked. "That's it?" JIMIN nodded. The original Moonchild demo. The one Namjoon recorded in 2017 before they scrubbed the verse. Yoongi's voice dropped to a whisper. The verse where he called out the first trial group. "Exactly," JIMIN said. "It's the only vocal confirmation we have that he knew. And that he warned us." Yoongi took the tape like it was a relic. "Where was it?" "Hidden behind the mirror in our old practice room," JIMIN said, his voice nearly cracking. "He left it for me, tucked into the backboard." Yoongi's mouth tightened. He knew they'd come for him. He knew they'd come for all of us. Inside the command room, the other four waited. Taehyung, pacing like a lion. Jungkook, staring at a broken drone screen. Jeon, still recovering from the nerve toxin they injected him with, sipping lukewarm broth in silence. It was Jeon who spoke first. "RM's not dead." Everyone turned. "He's not dead," he repeated. "I don't know where he is, but I can feel it. I know what their death tags look like." They staged his. It was too perfect. Too final. They wanted us to think he was gone. Taehyung's voice was a growl. Why fake his death if they already destroyed his mind? "Because the mind can recover," Jungkook said, his voice low, calculated. "But hope? Hope is harder to bring back once it's gone." They all fell silent, and the only sound was the drip, drip, drip of old water. Yoongi played the cassette. The audio was rough, saturated with tape hiss. Namjoon's voice crackled like a ghost. "They think we don't see it," the old recording said, "but we do. The handlers. The tests. The schedules that make us forget who we are. They're building idols like weapons. But if we're weapons, that makes us dangerous. Not to the enemy. To them." Then silence. Then the verse. The one no one had heard in years. The one that had been wiped from every server. "You can make a child of the moon. Feed him silence, dress him in tune. But he'll see you in the sunless gloom. And he'll write your ruin before you assume." The cassette stopped. JIMIN's hands were shaking. Yoongi turned to the others. "We leak it. We blend it into the new track. It gets out through the resistance network in Osaka." Taehyung was already nodding. "I have a contact in Shibuya. She has a pirate station that hijacks radio frequencies." "We're not just leaking music," Jungkook said. "We're leaking truth." Every word he said proves the manipulation goes back further than we thought. They didn't just start with us. We were Generation 4. That means there were 3 generations before BTS that no one remembers. Jeon looked pale. "How is that possible?" "Echo Protocol," Yoongi said. All heads turned toward him. "I found it in the metadata of the leaked surveillance footage from Namjoon's last facility." A phrase buried in frame code. Jimin's voice was low. "What is it?" "The Echo Protocol is a memory control system designed to suppress not only public knowledge, but historical footprint," Yoongi explained. They used AI-sourced narrative rewriting, neural disruption frequencies embedded in commercial music, and behavioral alignment programs across entertainment sectors. Every idol group that came before us? Not gone. Erased. Forgotten like they never existed. Taehyung sank onto the floor. They wiped out generations of artists to make room for us. And now they want to do the same to us. Jungkook stood. Then we burn Echo Protocol to the ground. Later that night, under cover of black market drones and a simulated satellite storm, the five moved through the ruins of an old government broadcasting complex, once the hub of televised truth in South Korea. Now a shell of ash and circuitry. JIMIN held the receiver. Yoongi carried the drive. Taehyung checked the external lines, fending off proximity sweeps. Jeon provided overwatch with a scoped railgun stolen from a convoy. Jungkook hacked the servers, breaching layer after layer of encrypted files until he hit echo_mainframe_archive.z0. It opened with a hum. Inside were names. Thousands of them. Group names. Real names. Stage names. All erased from existence. Some dating back to the early 1990s. All marked, status, forgotten. Threat level high. JIMIN whispered, they took everyone. Then he saw it. A name that stopped his heart. JIMIN, Park Jae-min status, pending erasure. Jungkook's name was next. Then Taehyung. Yoongi. Jeon. Namjoon. Hobi. A countdown beside each. 3 days. 11 hours. 42 minutes. They already initiated the final sweep, Yoongi said. They're wiping everything. Not just public files. Personal memories. How? Jeon whispered. Neurolinguistic triggers, Jungkook answered. They embedded them in the media we helped make. Interviews. Variety shows. Documentaries. Our own words will make people forget us. That's not just control, JIMIN said. That's genocide. A tremor shook the floor. They found us, Taehyung hissed, loading his sidearm. But JIMIN didn't run. He walked up to the transmitter, plugged in the drive, and said softly, if this is how it ends, then let's make sure it ends loud. Yoongi pushed the final sequence. The file injected itself into the global feed, jumping from Wi-Fi routers to street screens, hijacking car radios, echoing from smart speakers, bleeding into stadiums, churches, phones, hearts. A single signal. A voice Namjoon's, layered with their harmonies. The forbidden verse. The call to memory. The roar of the forgotten. It spread like fire. Across the world, people collapsed to their knees, images flooding back. A concert they forgot they attended. A lyric that haunted them with no known source. A name that suddenly meant something again. And in that moment, Echo Protocol began to collapse. The mainframe overloaded. The countdown stopped. The system tried to rewrite itself, but the code was infected, laced with their song, with their truth. Screens cracked. Glass shattered. And a new phrase appeared on every device connected to the global feed. We remember. In Seoul, as the storm tore across the skyline, JIMIN stood at the edge of the ruined rooftop, watching the city wake up. Jungkook joined him, bruised and silent. Do you think it's enough? JIMIN asked. No, Jungkook replied. But it's a start. Taehyung walked up beside them. What now? JIMIN looked over the city. Now we find the rest. RM? Everyone. The ones before us. The ones they tried to erase. Every name. Every voice. Every dream. Yoongi stepped out of the shadows, holding a cracked tablet. I've got coordinates. JIMIN smiled. Then let's go give memory a future. And together, they walked into the dawn. The jungle outside Pyongyang was never supposed to exist. Technically, it didn't. The place where the map said there should be mountains and flat farmland was instead a thick canopy of bioengineered trees, each designed to scramble satellite imaging, break signal waves, and cloak anything inside. They called it the Dead Vein, a buffer zone where echoes of failed experiments were buried like bones. Namjoon was in there. Or at least, that's what Yoongi believed. For months, rumors had filtered in through fractured resistance channels, a ghost facility where failed test subjects were sent, minds rewired, memory suppressed, names broken down into ciphers and recompiled into obedient templates. Some said Namjoon had escaped. Others said he ran the place now, a puppet behind the walls, watching through glass he couldn't remember how to break. JIMIN stared at the trees from the edge of a cliff. The air was thick with dew, insects, and an unnatural hum that never quite faded. Jungkook stood beside him, tightening the straps on his vest. You don't have to go in, Jungkook said, not looking at him. I have to, Jimin replied. I left him. All of us did. That wasn't your fault. Jimin turned. Then whose was it? Neither spoke for a long time. Yoongi emerged from the mobile relay unit, holding a cracked transmitter loaded with schematics. I've found a way in. It's not a door. It's a code buried in the security systems. We'll have to trigger it from inside. Taehyung joined them, brushing mud off his boots. I scouted the East Ridge. Mines. Motion sensors. But they're blind to echo frequency. If we hum at the right pitch, we might walk right through. Jeon limped out last, still recovering. His eyes were shadowed, but they burned with quiet fire. And if we find Namjoon, and he doesn't remember us? Jimin's jaw clenched. Then we make him remember. They entered under the cloak of rain. Yoongi played the hum through an old pocket recorder. A low, eerie vibration that made their teeth buzz, but somehow left the forest still. Birds fled. The air rippled. Leaves shimmered with the energy of 1,000 buried secrets. They crossed through layers of defenses, motion-triggered drones, dissonance alarms, retinal sweeps. Each time, one of them nearly died. At the second barrier, a laser grid sliced inches from Taehyung's shoulder. At the third, Jungkook took a shockwave to the ribs that knocked the wind out of him for 5 minutes straight. But they kept moving. Because Namjoon was calling. They found the entrance carved into a cliff wall, disguised as a rock slide, but smooth beneath the moss. A biometric panel sat just beside it, glowing faintly. Jungkook pressed his thumb to it. It rejected him. Yoongi did the same. Rejected. Then Jimin tried. It turned green. The door hissed open. They stepped into cold metal corridors lit by silent blue light. The air inside smelled sterile, but beneath that blood, sweat, old tears soaked into the vents. What is this place? Jeon whispered. Yoongi was reading the internal map on his tablet. It's called Facility Echo 9. But internally, it's referred to as the Labyrinth. Because it's designed to trap people? Jungkook asked. No, Yoongi said. Because it's designed to rebuild them. Jimin stepped forward. His footsteps echoed too loudly. Every hallway was identical, chrome walls, glass doors, no labels. Occasionally, they passed rooms with flickering lights. Each held a person. Some unconscious. Some strapped to machines. Some singing songs no one else remembered. At one point, they passed a young man humming Spring Day. Jimin froze. Who is he? He asked. Yoongi glanced inside. That's one of the pre-BTS prototypes. Generation 3. He looks like. I know. They modeled our facial structures off him. Fragments of his personality were encoded into your public profile. Jimin stepped away, ball rising in his throat. We were never original. No, Jungkook said, stepping beside him. We were the first to survive the programming and break it. They kept walking. Then they found it. A room unlike the others. Larger. Darker. Circular. At its center, Namjoon. He was standing. Not restrained. Not broken. But he didn't move as they entered. He stared at the far wall, whispering something under his breath over and over. Jimin stepped closer. Namjoon. Namjoon turned. His eyes were different. Blank and yet aware. Who gave you clearance? He asked. Hyung, it's us. Namjoon blinked. I don't understand. Are you test agents? Or error fragments? Jungkook stepped forward. You know who we are. Namjoon tilted his head. My name is RM. I facilitate neural recalibration. Do you require emotional defragmentation? Jimin stepped closer. Stop. Just stop. It's me. It's Jimin. Don't you remember that day in Busan? The rain, the fairy lights, the question you asked me that you never told the others. Namjoon frowned. I'm not programmed for sentiment. You asked me, Jimin said, voice breaking, would you sing even if no one listened? And I said yes. And you said, then that's what makes you dangerous. Something shifted in Namjoon's face. His lips trembled. The script in his brain stuttered. I don't remember. Then let me help you, Jimin whispered. He walked closer. Slowly. Pressed a trembling hand to Namjoon's chest. We're real. We lived. We loved. You fought for us. They broke you because you knew too much. But we came back. We're all here. Namjoon trembled. Yoongi stepped forward, pulled out a small device from his belt. This will undo the programming. Jungkook moved fast. Wait, what if it kills him? We have no other choice, Yoongi said. We either get RM back, or he keeps guiding other idols into oblivion. Jimin looked into Namjoon's eyes. It's your call, Hyung. You always made the calls. Namjoon's lips quivered. Then he whispered, do it. Yoongi pressed the trigger. Namjoon collapsed. They caught him. The next 2 minutes were filled with convulsions, screams, flashes of light from his ocular implants. Alarms blared. The building went red. Outside, automated defense systems activated. Jungkook dragged Namjoon toward the corridor while Taehyung covered their exit. Jeon triggered the self-destruct sequence with a corrupted echo code from the stolen files. As they ran, Namjoon opened his eyes. Clear. Focused. Jimin, he croaked. Jimin looked down, tears in his eyes. You're back. Namjoon smiled weakly. Of course. I told you. I'd right their ruin. They escaped moments before the facility imploded. Ash rained behind them as they stood on the cliffside, catching their breath. Namjoon, shaking, looked at each of them. How many are left? Too many lost, Jeon said. Not enough to give up, Yoongi added. Namjoon nodded. Then it's time. For what? Jimin asked. Namjoon's eyes flashed. For war. He pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. One that had survived through whatever hell he'd been through. A plan. Project Requiem. Their system runs on silence, Namjoon said. We're going to fill the world with noise. And below, as the last echo of Facility Echo, 9 collapsed into dust, the city trembled. Because the leaders had returned. Rain poured over the safe house in Daegu like morning itself, hammering the tin roof and pooling beneath rusted beams and shattered concrete. Inside, the last 7 were together again, not as BTS, not as idols, but as remnants of something that was supposed to die and refused. Jimin sat beside Namjoon, who was still recovering, though his mind was returning piece by piece, like someone picking up glass from a broken mirror. His voice was softer now. He flinched when things were too quiet and smiled too long when things were too dark. But the spark in him was real. And burning. Tell us, Jimin said quietly, what is Project Requiem? Namjoon glanced down at the folder he had been carrying for weeks, stained and torn. He spread the documents over the table. Everyone gathered, Jungkook, Yoongi, Jeon, Taehyung, Jimin, Hobi, whose arrival hours ago had felt like resurrection itself. Bloodied but alive, eyes sunken but laughing, Hobi had limped into the bunker with his old bomber jacket and nothing but the words, I heard the music, before collapsing into Jungkook's arms. Namjoon tapped the center of the folder, revealing a symbol none of them had seen before, a triangle inside a spiral, inked in black. Below it, 2 words, Requiem initiated. It wasn't just about us, Namjoon said. We thought we were the test. The product. But that was a misdirection. We were the distraction. The real operation was always Requiem. Yoongi frowned. Meaning? Meaning everything we went through, training, surveillance, emotional fracturing, memory wipes, it was all data collection. What they really wanted was the algorithm behind global obedience. Taehyung leaned in. Obedience to what? Control, Namjoon said. Governments used to rule with laws. Now they rule with narrative. Requiem is the code that makes the narrative self-reinforce. Jin's voice was bitter. So if the system tells people a lie, Requiem ensures they want to believe it? Worse, Namjoon said. Requiem convinces them they remember it being true. Jungkook stood. His voice was steel. How do we kill it? Namjoon looked at him. You don't kill it. You replace it. The room fell silent. What does that mean? Jimin asked. Namjoon pulled a worn flash drive from his pocket. I spent my time in Facility Echo, 9 encoding something into the neural framework. A song. Not like the memory war piece. Something deeper. Not just meant to wake people up, but to overwrite the narrative route. Yoongi's brows raised. You made a counter-algorithm? Namjoon nodded. It's called Code Zero. Hidden in melody, but infected with truth. Once heard, it causes cognitive dissonance in Requiem-exposed minds. Their framework collapses from the inside. Taehyung was already smiling. Then let's play it. Namjoon shook his head. We can't just drop it on the internet. Requiem firewalls have evolved. If we leak it wrong, it'll trigger a viral purge. Everything you've done, gets deleted permanently. So what do? Hobie asked. Namjoon looked at each of them, and there was an ache behind his words. We perform it. Live. One last show. JIMIN stepped back. No cameras. No network coverage. No audience. That's suicide. Exactly, Namjoon said. Because Requiem will never expect it. Yoongi rubbed his face. Where? Namjoon pointed to a map. There. Jamsil Olympic Stadium. The birthplace of our myth. We bring it full circle. Jungkook laughed, a bitter edge to it. They'll see us coming. Then we let them, Namjoon said. 3 days later, the world was silent. Not a literal silence, but something worse. A cultural hush. Music platforms had scrubbed nearly all BTS tracks. Social media timelines no longer showed fan accounts. Even photos from the 2010s had been blurred by automated content recognizers. The name BTS returned 0 results on most official databases. The erasure was almost complete. And still, word spread. In hushed whispers. Through coded messages. Fans painting white triangles on alley walls. Old fandom accounts hidden under new names. Memory meetups in subway tunnels. They called it the Bloom. At dawn, on the day of the Requiem, the stadium gates opened. Not by schedule. Not by permission. But by signal. Thousands came. No tickets. No seats. Just people, standing under a red sky as drones swirled overhead and the ghost of a stage was reborn from generators and hacked systems. Behind the curtain, the 7 stood together for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. They wore no makeup. No stylists. No cameras. Just black. Just real. I can't believe this is happening, JIMIN whispered. Yoongi adjusted a mic. I can. Taehyung grinned. It always had to end this way. Namjoon looked to them. It doesn't end. Not tonight. Then he looked to Jungkook. Are you ready? Jungkook smiled, tears in his eyes. I was born for this. They stepped out, and silence fell across the stadium. No screaming. No chanting. Just breath. And then, the music. It began as a whisper. A low hum buried in silence. No lyrics. No beat. Just presence. Then a pulse. A vibration. Something ancient and familiar, like remembering your mother's voice in a dream. JIMIN sang first. A line about fear. Then Hobie. A verse about light. Yoongi followed. Then Jeon. Then Taehyung. Namjoon walked forward next, placing a small stone in the center of the stage. Just a stone. Nothing more. He knelt beside it, whispering the same phrase over and over. You cannot kill memory with silence. Then he pointed to Jungkook. The youngest walked forward. Mic in hand. Hands trembling. Eyes full. And he screamed. Not a lyric. Not a note. Just truth. Raw, primal, broken, human. The sky cracked open. Not metaphorically. Literally. Satellites flickered. Systems collapsed. The Requiem core, buried in the orbital network that had been feeding lies into global memory archives, shuddered and fell silent. Inside their earpieces, Yoongi heard the code unravel. Lines of false data collapsing. In Tokyo, a mother suddenly remembered the concert she thought was a dream. In Brazil, a teenage girl who had been institutionalized for fan delusions woke up knowing every lyric again. In Morocco, a forgotten photo of JIMIN reappeared in a grandmother's drawer. Requiem was dying. Not by explosion. Not by revolution. But by song. And for the first time since their erasure, the world remembered BTS, not as a brand, but as boys. As voices. As people. The final note faded into silence. The crowd didn't cheer. They wept. Because they remembered. And then the gunshot. Yoongi fell. A sniper round. Chaos. Security teams scrambled. Jungkook tackled JIMIN. Namjoon threw himself in front of Hobie as another shot rang out. Taehyung ran toward the sound. Go! Yoongi screamed, coughing blood. Finish it. Jeon lifted him, dragging him toward the back. Another shot hit the stage lights. Screams. Panic. Namjoon ran to the mic. Don't run. The crowd froze. He screamed louder. Do not run. This is what they want. Fear. Silence. Disbelief. Do not give it to them. JIMIN stood up. Walked back to center stage. Blood on his shirt. Smoke in the sky. And he raised his hand. Not in defiance, but in memory. Behind him, the remaining members followed. The stadium became a sea of raised hands. And from across the world, others joined. Digital feeds hacked. Screens flickering. Photos restored. Music returned. A rebellion, not with weapons, but with remembrance. As the sun rose over the broken city, as sirens screamed in the distance, BTS stood together, bruised, bleeding, hunted, but alive. JIMIN looked at them, tears sliding down his face. Do we run? Namjoon answered. No. Jungkook held his hand. We rebuild. Yoongi, bloody but breathing, raised a shaky fist. From memory. And in that moment, across the world, a single phrase lit up screens and walls and hearts. We were never just a band. The war wasn't over. But the silence was. The fire at Jamsil Stadium burned for 3 days. It raged through steel scaffolding and melted the LED ghosts of stage lights that once shimmered above a million hearts. Smoke spiraled into the blood-orange sky, curling like a dirge above a city caught between forgetting and remembering. The government issued a complete media blackout. Official reports called it an unauthorized civilian gathering that escalated into a riot incited by extremist nostalgia cells. But it was already too late. The world had seen. No matter how many servers they purged, how many algorithms they weaponized, how many faces they tried to erase from the public record, BTS had broken through. The song Code Zero had nested itself in millions of minds. Not a virus. Not propaganda. A spark. Real, irrational, unfiltered memory. A kind of truth that couldn't be stamped out. Not anymore. JIMIN stood at the edge of the safe house rooftop in Busan, staring at the ocean. His shirt was stained from carrying Yoongi's body across the stadium floor. Yoongi wasn't dead, but the bullet had torn through his lung. They'd stabilized him for now, but the price of survival was steep. He couldn't speak. Could barely move. Jeon sat with him downstairs every hour, just whispering fragments of songs. Lyrics Yoongi used to write. Pieces of himself. Jungkook appeared silently beside JIMIN, sipping cold instant coffee. He said nothing for a long time. Then, softly, they're regrouping. JIMIN didn't move. I know. They've begun issuing memory denial orders. Threatening families. Shutting down music schools that still teach our chords. Of course they are. We can't stay hidden anymore. No. Then say it. JIMIN turned, finally looking at him. The wind blew his hair across his face. Say what? That this isn't about survival anymore. That we fight now. For real. JIMIN's eyes didn't waver. I know it's not about survival. Not since they put Namjoon in a cage and turned us into shadows. Not since they tried to write our history for us. Jungkook stepped closer. Then let's finish it. JIMIN didn't blink. What's the plan? Downstairs, the rest of them were already gathering. Namjoon sat at the center of the table, scrawling across old maps with a black Sharpie. His hand trembled from nerve trauma, but his mind was clear, too clear, maybe. Since his deprogramming, he'd been operating at a level none of them could quite follow. His thoughts came out as code, music theory, philosophical syllogisms. Sometimes they sounded like madness. Other times, prophecy. He pointed at 3 locations. 1. The memory core buried beneath the Seoul Broadcasting Tower. That's where they seeded the first echo waves. Every neural interference burst since 2020 originated from that location. He stabbed a second point. 2. The Lens Satellite Command Facility on Jeju Island, where they control the sky, where they beam fake timelines through data overlays into public feeds, where our disappearance was programmed into digital belief. He circled the 3rd. And 3. The source vault. Taehyung frowned. We still don't know if it's real. Namjoon looked up, eyes bloodshot. I've been there. I saw it. The source of the Requiem code. The original file. And something else. What? Namjoon's voice turned glass-sharp. The recordings of the ones before us. Generation 1. They survived. They were silenced. But they left behind one final track. A raw master file. JIMIN inhaled sharply. You're saying there was a band before us? Namjoon nodded slowly. Before BTS, there was ARC. Silence fell over the room. They were the prototype, Namjoon said. Built in 2005. Never debuted. Burned by the system when they broke control mid-performance in a classified military expo. They were erased from history. But the source vault holds their last message. Yoongi, still barely breathing, tapped twice on the metal arm of the cot. It was his way of saying yes. Jeon looked at him, then at the others. He thinks we need to find the vault. Release the ARC file. Let people hear what came before. Complete the chain. Taehyung tilted his head. But if we leak ARC's file, won't the system retaliate even harder? They will, Jungkook said. But they already are. Namjoon circled the vault one last time. We don't leak it. We broadcast it. One final show. In the oldest recording studio in Korea. JIMIN narrowed his eyes. You mean? Yep, Namjoon replied. Studio 3. The analog room beneath the old Seoul sound archives. Still connected to radio towers across the region. Pre-digital. Immune to signal corruption. Yoongi tapped once. Good. They moved at night. In silence. Like ghosts reclaiming their graves. Through tunnels, across forgotten streets, into ruins where statues once stood in their image, now shattered and spray-painted with warnings. Delusion is dangerous. They reached Studio 3 by crawling through the old sewer line under the Han River. The air stank of mold and revolution. Inside the studio, the air was still. Dust clung to every mic. The console was analog. Tape-driven. Humming with age and defiance. Namjoon placed the ARC file into the console. They listened. What they heard shattered them. 7 voices. Not theirs. Young. Raw. Screaming into silence. Harmonizing without harmony. Desperate. Beautiful. And then one voice, clear alone. They said no one would remember us. But we remember each other. And that's enough. Then static. Then silence. JIMIN looked at the others. Play it. Taehyung clicked record. The red light blinked. And BTS sang. Not with perfection. Not in tune. But with truth. They layered their pain over arcs. Wove their lyrics into the ones buried 17 years earlier. Memory over memory. Grief over grief. Joy reclaimed through breathless defiance. Yoongi, unable to sing, tapped out his rhythm with his knuckles. A beat that pulsed like a heartbeat refusing to stop. They called the track Eulogy for the Forgotten. When it ended, Namjoon flipped the master switch. The studio's tower flickered to life. Across Korea, people stopped. In cafes. In classrooms. On empty streets. They heard it. And they remembered. Names. Faces. Songs. Performances. Fandoms that had been buried. Idol groups they couldn't name but remembered loving. Shows they watched but had forgotten. Emotions they had been told were imaginary. A wave of memory broke through the world. Requiem servers overloaded. The narrative collapse was no longer speculative. It was happening. And then, the door to the studio burst open. Black Cloud agents. Guns raised. Namjoon turned, arms outstretched. Jungkook moved to cover him. A shot rang out. JIMIN screamed. Taehyung tackled the nearest guard. Chaos exploded. Jeon dragged Yoongi behind the console. Jungkook and JIMIN were side by side, defending the board with their bodies as the final bars of the track broadcasted into the ether. Blood splattered the wall. But the music didn't stop. Namjoon took 3 rounds before he dropped. But he smiled as he fell. Because the job was done. The world had heard. And for the first time in decades, the truth was louder than the lie. Weeks later, the fires were still burning. Governments fell. Agencies were exposed. The Music Integrity Tribunal revealed thousands of erased artists across decades. The name BTS became a rallying cry, not for fandom, but for memory itself. Jimin stood at Youngi's grave, holding a single cassette. Beside him, Jungkook. Behind them, Taehyung and Jeon. Hobi now led the memory coalition. Namjoon's name was etched in stone across the Hall of Voices, where every erased artist was now honored. Jimin placed the cassette on the grave. "You said we weren't just a band," he whispered. "You were right." Jungkook put his hand on Jimin's shoulder. "And now, the world sings because we remembered how." They walked away. Into a world finally wide awake. Because silence had lost. And memory had won.